Ever since we started grade school, we've all been told that we need a big, strong government to look after us. And that, sure, it may need fixing here and there, but generally, today's government size is about right. We disagree. We think that government is a parasite, living off what you and I earn and using our money to do unpleasant things to us. From being a nation of self-reliant go-getters, America is fast becoming a country of government junkies. We think an alternative exists, one that puts you back in charge of your own life and destiny. We call it the freedom alternative. Good evening, I'm Peter Verderosa. Shortly after President Bush announced the dispatch of the U.S. military to Saudi Arabia last August to, quote, protect Kuwait and preserve our way of life, end quote, a national poll showed 66% of the American public in favor of his action. That's 2 out of 3. For 10 weeks, there was virtually no report in the major media of any protest or opposition to the proposed war. Since the worldwide protest marches of October 20th, however, such reports have grown, and House Democrats, sensing political opportunity, have started to do what they should have done on August 3rd, but didn't. Some of them now oppose military action. On Christmas Eve, the Wall Street Journal published 5 letters to the editor out of 6 with anti-war viewpoints. And in the same week, the Danbury News-Times published a local poll showing 66% against the war. Though the change may not have been so pronounced nationwide, here, opinion has moved from 2 to 1 in favor to 2 to 1 against in 4 months. Now, nobody has done more locally to help cause that dramatic change than Walter Hrozenchik of Ridgefield, our first panelist this evening. He is chairman of the Danbury Veterans for Peace Association and has campaigned tirelessly for nuclear disarmament for many years. This program may also have helped influence public opinion, and our second panelist this evening is Jim Davies, its producer. The 2 gentlemen I've just introduced to you were featured together in the November 25th edition of the Danbury News-Times in a fine article by Karen Strutton. And tonight, we have the chance to see, hear, and question them live on television. While Jim, as a libertarian, wants to see a vast reduction of government across the board as well as in its pursuit of warfare, Walter may not agree with all of that. We shall therefore expect to see some differences between them, as well as their full agreement that the Gulf intervention is absolutely wrong. Tonight we'll explore Jim and Walter's areas of agreement and those areas in which they don't agree. With respect to the not imminent war, but the war that's already begun, and to war in general. After the first half of our program, we'll announce a call-in number so that you too can put questions to both of these gentlemen. Welcome then to this special live edition of the Freedom Alternative on the vital subject of war and peace. And I might add at this point to the viewers, and I hope that you're focused on this program in spite of some of the other news that's coming along on other channels at this time, and the news that you may have seen on this channel just before this program began, that we all are feeling very, very sad this evening in view of the fact that our armed service personnel are engaged in battle currently in Baghdad and the whole of Iraq. Now, for my first question this evening, in taking a look at this issue of war and peace and the differences here as they might be expressed between a libertarian and a liberal, I want to ask you, Walter Hrozenchik, welcome to the program. Why is the Gulf intervention wrong?
Peter, I feel, see, our national interest. I feel it's just another case of the U.S. meddling where it does not belong. We are making friends over there. I'm afraid we're going to polarize the country more than it even is. Right now, it's polarized between your Arabs, your Israelites, and your Jordanians. We're just making another split in this thing, making things more confusing. I don't see where we should be there. We have nothing to gain from it. We have everything to lose. As a result of tonight's action, I'm afraid we will be occupying Iraq, I'd say, between 5 and 10 years. What will happen when, let's say, we are going to, and no doubt about that, we have superior power. There will be bloodshed, and we will do a lot of fighting. Now what will happen after we win the war? We'll occupy it, of course. You always occupy a country after you beat it. What happens to oil wells? We don't leave them sit in the ground. We pump oil out. Who's going to pump them out? Gulf, Shell. We find a way to American oil wells, gas stations, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to go on into
no, that's quite all right.
A short question.
How long do you think that the war itself is going to last? How long do you think the battle will actually take?
Well, we found out from the Second World War, when you bomb a capital city, you do not beat the people in submission. They get angry. Londoners did not give up when their city was pulverized by the Luftwaffe for months or weeks at a time. They got more resolved. They fought back harder. Berlin did not quit when we flattened them. You get determined, you get resolved, you fight back harder. Especially today, we invaded that country. We bombed an unsuspecting country, akin to what happened at Pearl Harbor. It boggles my mind. I'm so emotional tonight. I don't know if I'm going to do justice to the topic, but it's a terrible thing we did tonight, people. And
well, for those people who did not see the Danbury News-Times article, which featured both you gentlemen on November 25th, I could mention at this point that Mr. Hrozenchik here has actually had a complete change of point of view, haven't you, over a period of some 20 to 30 years, isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And you, even to the point where you felt so strongly about it that in your job at Nash Engineering, is it, you actually asked for transfer off of the production of parts for nuclear reactors?
Well, actually, I said I would not work on it. More jobs came in. Fortunately, the nuclear power plant industry has been going down, haven't been any new jobs. But I did say I do not wish to design parts for a nuclear plant. Mm-hmm. It's mainly because I started out, I believed it. Well, let's go back a little further. We're talking about the way things are. Oh, back in 1963, around there, I worked on the Titan launching system. The Titan missile was the first missile we had, that and the Atlas. This was our answers to the Russians. The Russians had us beat. We were very vulnerable, they said at that time. I worked hard on them. I went out in the field and I helped install them. I saw them put the missile into the hull, and I believed all this time. Unfortunately, I kept reading and reading and reading. Come to find out, we were never behind the Russians in missile development, ever. Not since the day one. And I started thinking, my government lied to me. And I started reading more and more, and finding my government has not stopped lying to me. I read what happened in Nicaragua. We never mined our harbors, they said. The UN investigation showed we did. In fact, we were judged guilty in the United Nations courts, and we have to pay Nicaragua like $27 million, I believe, as judgment. We said we will not pay, even though we admitted to doing this. So by getting myself informed, reading the papers rather closely between the lines, I've changed my mind on a lot of things. Just another aside, on the same missile project, I was working with another designer, and after 30-some-odd years, I ran into him the other night, and he called me, and he's a peace stick now, too. He's been out in Nicaragua. He works with Witness for Peace. So two of us came to our senses, maybe more, maybe less, I'm not sure. I wish the whole world would come to its senses.
I'd like to stop you at this point and ask Jim Davies, producer of the Freedom Alternative, the same question. Why, Jim, is the Gulf intervention wrong?
Well, Peter, both Walter and I knew this question was coming, so rather than take up the whole night offering you a list of 75 reasons, I've made a short list of just 6 and have noted them down here. I feel first and perhaps foremost, Peter, the reason that this whole intervention, not just the war, but the intervention economically, the sanctions, and then the war, which started on August 3rd, just one day after the invasion, is dead wrong, 100% wrong, first and foremost because it is unconstitutional. There is not the slightest syllable of a mandate in the Constitution for United States government to intervene overseas in the affairs of any other nation, not positively, as it is doing, for example, with Israel, or negatively, as it's doing tonight by bombing Baghdad. There is no mandate for it. There is no defensive need in the United States, and therefore there is no mandate for it. And indeed, if any viewer in our audience should feel otherwise, I would be very interested to hear him read the words of the Constitution that says otherwise. I don't believe they're there, and Consequently, what the Congress did last week and what the President has been doing since last August has been illegal. They should all be impeached. In fact, I did plan to say tonight that they should be sent to the front in uniform tonight so that maybe there's one last chance to stop the war. We now know that, unfortunately, that's too late. Second reason, there is no defense treaty between the United States government and the Kuwaiti government. It wouldn't have been constitutional if there had been, but there isn't. And the fiction that we are there to rescue Kuwait has therefore got no basis in fact. Third, as Walter was saying, and I'd fully agree with what he said, the cost of this intervention is far too high. I have heard no account of what the benefits of this intervention are going to mean to me, or to you, or to Walter, or anybody in the studio or watching us tonight. I don't know what the benefits are. I do know something of the costs. I don't know how long we're going to be there. What do you think we're going to be there, 5 or 10 years? Well, you could be right. I do know that right now, to secure Soviet cooperation, there's been a taxpayer-guaranteed credit line of, I think, $1 billion of grain to support the Soviet Union so that freedom, individual freedom, is now being delayed in the Soviet Union. As a result of that, we're propping up the communist regime in order to gain their cooperation. We have now been told in the last few days there may be terrorist acts in the United States. The Iraqi agents, if they are here, may at this moment be carrying them out. We don't know that. They may start tonight. They may go on for years. It may no longer be safe to fly the skies internationally after this week as a result of terrorism. There has been a massive effect on prices of oil. The cost that we pay to keep the army there, $100 million a day. It's outrageous. The cost is unacceptable, whatever the benefits. Walter's already mentioned, I think, the fact that the great industry of war, the military-industrial complex, is going to be boosted by this whole affair. They're going to be able to turn around and say, you need us, see, you can't do away with us. Keep paying $300 billion a year because we're needed. They wouldn't have been needed if the peace moves of the last several years in Europe had been allowed to develop freely. It could escalate. It may in the next few days escalate into a global nuclear war if Israel is invaded and responds with nuclear weapons. We don't know whether it will be. We hope it won't be, but it is quite possible that this war will get out of control. That is an unacceptable cost to me. Finally, if it is successful, quote unquote, according to the president, it will lead to a new world order. I find that a very sinister phrase. I don't think it's a good idea at all. I think what he has in mind is some extra layer of government in the world, some kind of super government, and I feel that we individual people need an extra layer of government like we need a hole in the head. These are 6 of the key reasons why I would say that this entire intervention from start to finish is dead wrong.
Mm-hmm. Some interesting things come to mind during your answer to that question, but to move along here with questions that we all know we had planned on asking you gentlemen, this next one is to take a look at perhaps how you differ in your approach to force. And the question is, and I present it first to you, Walter Hrozenchik, let's just give a scenario and let's see how you would handle this. Suppose an armed man broke into your house and you had the means to defend yourself with deadly force. What would you do?
Well, first of all, of course, a very great situation. You say with deadly force, you assume I have the drop on the person. You certainly could not shoot him as you walk through the door. You may find yourself on trial for shooting someone. Responding with undue force is against the law. You just cannot shoot people, of course, in your house. So you have to prove that they intended to hurt you. So you'd better be careful. I would also think twice if you're better armed than me. I don't know what I'd do if you're better armed than me. I may just start to talk to him. Assuming he came in through the door or through the window.
You might take that risk and just talk to him?
What choice do you have?
Well,
to shoot him, kill him.
What would be the intruder's intent if indeed he were armed with a firearm?
I'm not sure. I have no idea whether it's loaded. I do know the police have said that whenever people try to get the drop on a burglar or someone coming into the house, they inevitably get shot. You say stop or I shoot. If he has a gun, he knows what he's going to do. He's going to turn around and shoot you. Before you can even think about shooting him, you've already been shot. So an armed a person armed against an intruder really is not armed. He's not forewarned. It just doesn't work. I feel you're better off let him do what he wants. I'd make all the noise I could. If I heard him from far away, I'd make all the noise I could. I'd kick into a table, cough, whatever. Give him a chance to get out. He doesn't want to hurt me any more than I want to hurt him. Give the guy a chance to run out.
That's what your intuitive sense tells you. He doesn't want to hurt you any more than you want to hurt him.
That's what the authorities tell us. I do not have a gun in my house. I will never get a gun in my house. Guns in houses kill more innocent people than they do burglars or intruders. It's a matter of record. Guns kill more family matters than they do criminals. And I will never take that chance on my family. I will not have a gun in my house.
Let's see how Jim Davies responds to the same question. Jim, I don't have to restate the question.
No,
right?
no.
Okay.
I was presuming, I am presuming, that the situation has gone beyond the point of possible negotiation, and maybe we not quite answering the same question here, that we are faced with a deadly attack here, that we can see it. And the question to me is, what will you do? Will you kill the guy if you can, or would you suffer him to kill you? If the defender, the occupant of the house, is of that clear opinion that we've got a choice between him or me, my answer to that would be, I will use that force. I have no problem of conscience whatever with defending myself, and my reasons are that I believe that, like everybody else in the world, I have sole ownership of my own life. I am the only person who can validly dispose of it. If somebody comes in and attempts to take it away from me, then I believe I have an absolute right to defend myself, even by taking his, he being the aggressor. I'm therefore not a strict pacifist, as possibly you are. I would use force. I would, in those circumstances, assuming that they exist, I would aim to put a bullet just about midway between his left eye and his right eye. I would do it quite deliberately and without any, I would not forget it, but I would not have any conscience about it.
Jim, I like to be pacifist, but I don't have the courage to be pacifist. It takes courage to be a pacifist. It takes more courage to be a pacifist than it takes, excuse me, than it takes to pull the trigger. The minute you pull the trigger, you open yourself up to missing, you open yourself up to the chance he's going to pull the trigger too. I think I'd rather take a chance of having him shoot an unarmed man, which very few people do. There are people, of course, who do this, but the majority of people don't shoot unarmed people to kill. When you're defenseless, the intruder most often, mostly than not, will respond. You're no threat to him. He's not going to hurt you. You don't have a gun. When you have a gun, you're a threat to him, and he's going to take means of getting up that threat, you. That's about it. I can go on, but...
Okay.
Let's take this next question. And by the way, with that second question, before we leave it, it does bring up a point, in my mind anyway. It makes me want to ask, has the mixed value system of the Western world created men like Saddam Hussein or even Adolf Hitler? Because they're mixed signals that indeed come from, especially from the Congress of the United States of America, because they are politically motivated. Do you follow what I'm saying?
No, really, Pete.
In other words...
What kind of person would you please...
Well, in relation to this last question that we went over, the use of deadly force, when you're being confronted in such a manner, right, has the mixed value system...
Being what? What's the mixed value system?
In other words, for example, why has the media here not shown every night since August 2nd, why have they not shown those films of the atrocities performed by Saddam Hussein?
I've wondered the same thing myself.
Why have they put him in a suit and tie and been so gentle to him and diplomatic and asked him questions, gentleman to gentleman?
Well, probably the same way they treated President Bush. Perhaps they're treating both sides as gentlemen.
But indeed, my point is, do you follow what I'm saying?
Not entirely, Pete, no, no.
In other words, was it appropriate to, in fact, with the immediate interview by Ted Koppel of Kaziz, and I watched that night. That was in the first night, I believe.
Yeah.
Koppel was fairly tough on Kaziz, but indeed perhaps not tough enough in that interview, and subsequent interviews, and even those few times when Saddam Hussein could be shown on TV himself. It's always parliamentary procedure, diplomacy, the proper manner in which to show these negotiations or these interviews, rather than to just out and out say, you're doing evil, you are wrong. It is definite.
We'll try and not make that mistake tonight, Peter. I think they're all a bunch of thugs. Every one of them, you know?
do you follow my point
before you call something evil, Peter, it's a judgmental decision, isn't it?
Is it judgmental with regard to Saddam Hussein?
We have the same story. A terrorist to you is freedom fighter to someone else.
But I mean,
it's a judgmental decision.
We're speaking here of a man who allowed his troops to roll into Kuwait and commit rape, plunder, looting. It's incredible.
Well, so far,
everybody knows that.
Everybody may know it, but I don't know if everyone believes it.
Well, that's my point.
I'm not so sure if I believe everything the Kuwaitis are telling us. I assume some of the bad things happen. To what degree, I'm not really sure. I've been around long enough to see lies started out as positive truths. By the time they're all finished, nothing but lies. I can think of a Gulf of Tonkin resolution at this time that started out as an invasion that was nothing but a pack of lies that turned around getting 50,000 people killed. Peter, I wait until I get the full story and everything. It may take years, maybe days, maybe never. Mm-hmm. But you just can't swallow everything you heard. I'm perplexed. Amnesty International, whom I respect, I think it's a great outfit, they came in condemning Iraq for what they did in Kuwait. One night, I gave you the story, but they never pressed it. Why did they not press it? Why did they not use it? This could have been a reason why I went into Kuwait, at least from some points of view. And you think they'd press this point, but they never did. You hardly ever hear about that. Why? Is it not a valid report? What's happening? I don't understand. I've seen too many lies in this country, told by too many sides, to believe everything I hear, at the moment I hear it.
Jim Davies, do you think that that film showing men, women, and children half-broiled under mustard gas attack, like par-baked chickens, do you think that should have been shown more?
Those are Kurdish.
I'm not sure.
That's correct, yeah.
I don't have much...
No, I meant those people on whom Saddam Hussein used mustard gas.
The rapes and stuff were Kuwait.
No. I'm talking now about the atrocities committed before this entire episode.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that most people would accept, I certainly accept, that the man is a monster. Like I think most politicians are monsters when their mask comes off.
Okay, I don't want to belabor this point. I want to move on. But the thing is, I just want to make this point. What say you of the fact that these gentlemen, it seems like a poor term to use on such animals. They were treated all too kindly, isn't that so? By the media?
I'm not sure that I have that opinion. I don't intend to express such a view of either Hussein or Bush. But while I suppose their motivation was that while there is some hope of a negotiated peace, let's keep up a pretense. Why not? It's better, perhaps, to do that rather than to have tens of thousands more people being killed. I wouldn't have a strong opinion.
Next question. Should a country defend itself, and if so, how? This gets into the purpose of government.
Yeah, Peter, we should look at that question in a couple of different ways. Certainly every country is allowed to defend itself. Defending yourself does not always mean going to war. There are ways of defending yourself. And it's something you don't wait till the need to defend yourself occurs, then start learning how to defend yourself. You start learning how to defend yourself right now from something that may happen a long time ago. How do you learn to defend yourself? Perhaps you make peace. Perhaps you do things that bring a peaceful world. Perhaps you get rid of some of the injustices in this world that bring war. So you defend yourself, you plan your defense, like you do a military defense. By planning it, you look to see what you can do to keep evil things happening to your country or from being invaded. War, to me, does not do anything, does not prove anything, does not solve anything. How many times do we have to have a world war in this country and kill millions of people to tell us that they don't solve anything? What did the Second World War solve 30 years later? Where are we? Who won the Second World War, guys? Japan being powerful today and us being where we are. Who won the war? West Germany. Who won the war? We may have won the battle, but the war goes on and on and on. History goes on and on and on, made of no battles. And war has never solved anything. My fondest hope and ambition and prayer is that someday we will abolish war. And I believe man has gotten to a point where we see the folly, the true folly of war. I'm afraid we're going to find out once more the folly of war. Unfortunately, it's going to cost us blood, it's going to cost us deaths, it's going to cost us maimed bodies. The same things that caused us in the Vietnam is going to cause us more today.
Let's ask Jim. Should a country defend itself, and if so, how?
Well, related to the early question, should we defend ourselves individually in a deadly situation? Our answers differ on that. I believe that a society, a country, can validly defend itself if its members agree to do so. I would propose that there ought to be two preconditions met, however, before any such force is ever used by a country. And the first one, it must be very clearly visible to all participating, obviously excepting the aggressor, that the defending country is truly in a defensive situation. There's been no provocation towards war by the defending country, as there was, for example, by Roosevelt in March of 1941 when he provoked Japan to attack the Navy in Pearl Harbor. That kind of consideration got to be completely absent, and everybody must be convinced of that. That's a prior condition. Difficult to enforce, I know, but that's what I would see as a prior condition. The second necessary precondition is that all those individuals participating in the defensive war must do so without compulsion. They must voluntarily take part. No draft, no conscription, no taxation whatsoever to pay for it. All participants, whether paying for it, logistically supporting it, or actually doing the fighting, should be doing so voluntarily because they want to defend their country. And those, I think, are pretty tough preconditions. If you have those in play, in action, I don't think there are going to be too many wars. I think the second part of the question was how should it do it if it does do it, and I would point out that, in my opinion, socialized defense, collective defense, which is what most countries have now, where the people assign to the government of that country the responsibility to do all the fighting and deciding and decision-making, is about the worst possible kind of defense you can imagine, or at least that I can imagine. It is extremely dangerous. You're putting all your eggs in one basket. If the government's army should be outmaneuvered or overcome, the entire country goes belly up. It has happened again and again and again. It has happened in Kuwait. The Kuwaitis were so foolish as to trust their government to defend them. The government was out of the country in 24 hours. It was a dead loss. It was happening in France in 5 weeks in 1940.
I want to come back to that point, but we're just about at midway in the program here. And at this time, and by the way, this is the 16th day of January 1991. We're broadcasting live from Comcast studios here in Danbury, Connecticut. And it's a pretty sad evening because the whole darn thing there in the Persian Gulf has escalated, and we have started firing in Danbury. Our guests, I by the way, am Peter Verderosa, your host and moderator, and our guests, our panelists this evening, are peace activist Walter Hrozenchik and producer of the program, The Freedom Alternative, Jim Davies. It is at this time that I would like to give you, the viewer, a chance to participate by calling us on the following telephone number. It's 792-5514. Let me give you that one more time. It's 792-5514. Please call and address your questions to either Jim or to Walter or both. In moving along, which gentleman was the last good war, if any? I'd like to ask that of you, Jim.
Okay, if I could possibly just finish off the question halfway through before the break.
You weren't finished with that one.
I got another hour and a half to go on this one. We were discussing there the question of how, if a country decides to defend itself, how it should do it. I was suggesting that collectivized defense, where the government does it for it, is an extremely bad strategy. because it so easily and so frequently fails. All your eggs are in one basket. A much more effective way for a country to defend itself, assuming it has to, is, I believe, for individuals to take that responsibility one by one. This is the method that is the strategy used in Switzerland. The Swiss government does, the federal government does play more a part than I would like it to, but the strategy is for each householder to have his own gun, to be trained in it, to keep it in good shape, and to be ready to use it if necessary in the defense of the country. A potential invader therefore knows that he has got to fight street by street, village by village, house by house, tremendous price of conquest. The theory is he will not therefore invade, there will be no war, and in fact in Switzerland I think it's 3.5 centuries since they were involved in the war. It's a very good strategy. I would like to see it adopted here.
But of course then someone would ask, but what about the rich person who has means and is up to no good? He will be able to contrive or manufacture or acquire a weapon that is certainly far more devastating than the Uzi that's in the closet of the average citizen.
Well, the context we're thinking of is that a country is facing imminent invasion. And I'm saying that in that context, the deterrent force of several million people, each not centrally controlled, you see, very little guidance from the center, but making their own decisions about shooting this occupying shoulder in the back. Yeah, this is too high a price. Now, we've seen it happen. I'm not wanting to be associated with the Irish Republican Army only because they shoot civilians and children in the back. They have pursued a dreadful strategy. But if they had merely acted as opponents of the occupying British government, then they would be a good example of this model. And Ireland, too, has not been conquered, not been subdued in 3.5 centuries, I think. So this is a very effective defense strategy. Furthermore, it cannot be used for offense, whereas a government fully armed to the teeth, as ours is, can and is frequently used for offense. The government goes off on its own power trip and does what it's now doing in Baghdad tonight.
So you're saying then that in protection of the borders of a continent, of a country, it sort of would be self-checking.
Yeah. To the extent that defense is needed, and we were saying earlier that there are two very, very strict preconditions for a defensive war, and that is, A, that you are truly defensive, that you didn't provoke the aggressor, and secondly, that each individual participant is acting voluntarily. That's not the case and hasn't been in this country for 2 centuries, which might be a cue for the next question you were about to bring to us, I think.
Okay. The question was, Walter, you want to take this one?
Sure, since you ask it.
Which was the last good war, if any?
Well, Peter, there never was a good war. Before I go on further, I'd like to just quote Benjamin Franklin, who said, there never was a good war or a bad peace. War is never any good. The price is always too high. The price of the people you kill will never grow up. The genius who will invent a cure for a deadly disease who's never going to grow up. The person who fought in the war has stopped growing in his mind. Just gets put away in a veterans home or someplace where we have thousands now. I particularly think of my cousin, stopped growing up at 18 at Angelo Beachhead. After 5 weeks of training, they decided they need troops, and he was there. The kid never came back. He came back physically, mentally, he never came back. What is the price? What is that life worth? Nothing is worth a life. I really don't know. Wars disgust me. I see no sense to it. I can never justify a war.
The last good war, Jim Davies?
Like Walter, I have a lot of reservation about using the term good in the same sentence as war. It is extremely horrible in every way. As we've seen in the program so far, I'm not quite as averse to the use of force in self-defense as Walter is, and by extension this can be used by a country. I cannot see any war, again our viewers may help with an example that I'm not aware of, but I cannot recall any war, at least in the last 200 years, that involved America, that was truly defensive and only defensive, which is my criterion number one, and in which all the participants were taking a voluntary part. And consequently, I think we have to go back at least that far before we find one. I would say that the Revolutionary War was pretty darn close. I believe that most of the participants did so voluntarily. Here in Ridgefield and Danbury, there were so-called Tories who did not take part in the revolution. They sided with the legitimate government of the day, which happened to be British. And they were not, I believe, much persecuted for that fact. It was a voluntary war. And furthermore, it was clearly defensive in that all the colonialists had done was, or the rebels, if you will, had done was say, we declare that we're going to rule ourselves. We don't want to be ruled by that government anymore. That's not an aggressive act. That's merely asserting one's self-ownership.
Jim, I'm going to stop you right there. We have a caller.
Okay.
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Peter? Peter Verderosa, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Peter, I'd just like to make an observation, make a statement, and hopefully your two guests and maybe yourself would like to comment on it. Back in the early 40s, when Dr. Einstein and other scientists developed the capability for nuclear warheads and nuclear bombs, I remember reading that Dr. Einstein was asked, what is the true significance of this kind of a weapon? And he answered quite simply that it has washed away all national boundaries, that national boundaries no longer had any real meaning. And if you think about it, that's true. If we were in a war with Russia or anybody else and they dropped a bomb on Detroit, there would have been a lot of Canadians killed, or if there were a bomb dropped on Dallas, there'd be a lot of Mexicans killed. The point being that Einstein was totally right. National boundaries do not stop the horror of nuclear explosions. And prior to tonight, when we set progress towards peace back so significantly, the boundaries all over the world were disappearing. We've been witnessing them disappearing in Eastern Europe, and we're witnessing the disintegration of the Russian Empire. The countries are demanding their own independence and trying to dissolve those boundaries. We're at the start of the free trade idea in Europe, where would have been unthinkable a couple generations ago, but Frenchmen and Germans are going to cross the boundaries between those two nations, that national boundary, without any passports or visas, and goods and people will walk across to go to work in each other's countries on a daily basis. And the national boundaries are truly disappearing all over the world. And I just wondered whether you or your guests might want to comment on that, and how this tragedy tonight is setting this progress towards true world peace back so severely. Thank you.
Thank you for the call. Gentlemen, would you care to respond?
Well, I agree with the caller, especially about the part of taking down the barriers and boundaries. People will be better off without wars. Perhaps not today, but in the long run, they will be. The children will be. Everyone will be, if you simply, I hate to quote something so bumper stickerish, give peace a chance. It will win. Peace makes money. Peace is good for the economy. Peace is cheap. Rewards are plenty. In this respect, war has nothing to stack up against peace in no way, shape, or form. And I don't care if you live as a slave. If you live, you can do things. You can change things if you live. But once you're dead, you're not changing a thing. And so the thing is to live, hopefully, in peace. Slavery, if you have to.
Do I take it that there's one area in which both of you agree, and that is that the decisions of Congress, both the Senate and the House, in this matter, is an indication of just pure politics as usual? I mean, you make reference to the military-industrial complex and the ramifications of disassembling it with an already bad economy. Are you really angry at them?
Yeah, I'll jump on that, Pete, if I may. Many times, not many times, last couple of days, we were talking about the move of the country, consensus of the country, and people say, well, the consensus of the country was shown by Congress. If Congress wants war, it must mean people want war. This morning's paper, Lieberman was getting phone calls 3-1 against war. Dodd was getting 3 or 4-1 against war. Nancy Johnson was getting against war. Gary Franks was getting against war. Yet those Lieberman voted for war, Nancy Johnson voted for war, Gary Franks voted for war. So all these people called in. And I ask you, if a Congress that's made up of predominantly men, white men, if I might add, does not represent women at all, 5 maybe women congressmen, are they indicative of this nation? Where are the women who are against the war? Why aren't they represented more? 50% maybe, but they should be.
We have a phone call. Let's try it. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Peter,
Yes.
I want to know something. I'm just an individual, and what really bugs me at this point is that this war has already started tonight, and there's nothing I can do about this now. And it seems like that's been the whole thing that's been happening in the last 2 weeks. Every time I open the paper, every 3 pages cover this war in one aspect or another, and even though I've been against this, I can't seem to figure out what I can do. I know when the bombing started a couple hours ago, I walked into my job and the person said to me, "Oh, did you hear the news?" And they had this distraught look on their face. And it was like they were like resolved that this is going to happen. What can one person do if they just, I guess in the paper when I was reading these articles, the people that were protesting were given less voice in the media than what the government was doing every day, what the government's doing, what the government is doing. What can you do as an individual? I mean, you just got to sit there and listen to your friends my friend had this distraught look on her face like, oh, God, this is it. And, I sort of feel the same way, helpless, not knowing what to do as an individual. It seems like in the 1990s, the media has control, and they could sway everybody to make everybody feel helpless.
I may look a little bit distraught tonight, but I'm going to I'm going to give you an optimistic viewpoint and say that just by the fact that you have taken an interest and are watching this program this evening, that's a start, and you should feel good about it. And I feel that it's time for a big change, time for things to happen. I feel privileged to be involved with the Freedom Alternative, privileged to know people like Jim Davies and Walter Hrozenchik, and all the people affiliated with the philosophy behind the Freedom Alternative. And indeed, people like yourself, if you'll call shows like this, if you'll write letters, if you'll get into the blue pages of your phone directory, and believe me, there are people at the other end of the telephone line in the offices of senators and representatives who do make note of what you've got to say. By all means, do it. And don't feel so frustrated, because you're making a point right now, and a darn good one.
But Peter, they don't act.
Yeah, it's tough to even be heard sometimes when you pick up the paper and every news report is about that. So it's just like, where do you start? Where do you start to sit there and say, listen, this has got to stop right now, without the media looking at you like you're crazy? Or not like you're crazy, but okay, here's the pages of protesters, and the other pages here about what the government's going to do. So I just wanted to know where to go from there.
Yeah, well, I know you feel frustrated, but I tell you what, Walter Hrozenchik is itching to answer you, and why don't you take the answer on the air, okay? Thanks for the call. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim just kind of gave me a few hints. First of all, vigil. Be out there on the streets with these people. We may not get reported as much as we should, but we're starting to get more and more. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to do drastic actions to get noticed, but we are getting noticed more and more. I feel the people coming around to our way of thinking more and more. So do something. Do anything, but do something. The other thing is there's a couple of bus trips coming up down in Washington, D.C. There's one this Saturday. There's one next Saturday. Give me a call at 438-2529. I'm taking reservations for this bus trip. $30 is round trip. You can go back and forth, be down in Washington. Be part of the mob that's going to change this world. The people that have to change this world. Our politicians are not going to do it. Our military are not going to do it. You and I, Jim and Peter, we are going to have to do it ourselves. No one else will. We are paying for this mess. We have to clean up this mess. We have nothing to do with this mess, but unfortunately, we have to clean it up. And it's not going to be easy.
But what do you say to the idea that we've gotten to a point where government has gotten so much into our individual lives that we no longer have the time to buy your bus ticket and accompany you? It's sort of a catch-22.
Yeah, I know what you're getting at, Pete, and I agree with you. The government is much too big. It is much too much into our lives.
On that, the two of you do agree.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I'm surprised.
That agree.
Do we disagree on anything? Well, I didn't know.
You said I can't disagree on people tonight. No, seriously, I do say the government is much too much into our lives. How do you get them out? I'm not sure. What do you do with the Congress that can vote itself a 30% pay raise without any squawk from the people? The squawking happened 6 months ago. Squawking died down. They just snuck in themselves. To me, it would have been at least fair and decent to give the next Congress a raise. Don't start with yourself. Start with the succeeding Congress. But they didn't do it. They're not listening out there. They're doing things the way they want. I really think the military-industrial complex is taking control of this country. The military is in control.
You've made mention of the military-industrial complex several times this evening.
How long do you gentlemen think it would take before draft starts? Once again,
I was drafted in 1965.
well, I fooled them. I enlisted. Sure.
Can I put a comment on this, Peter?
Go right ahead.
You know, the caller's got such an excellent question here. What can an individual do? I think two or three things come to mind. One, contact one of us. Walter's given you his phone number. What's ours? 1-257-4844. Call the Freedom Alternative. We've got a reading list. Get acquainted with just how bad government is. It is really bad. I mean, we've been lied to, as Walter said, all our lives by government. We need to know what a monster it is and do something about it. Get intellectually prepared for this, the battle. And it's going to be a battle.
1-257-4844.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Now, there is another thing. If a draft does come here, and if you're a draft age, well, there are a lot of people who burn their draft cards. I think it'd be great if a lot of smoke went up from the United States in the next few weeks if draft cards come out. And let's tell them, hell no, we won't go. You know, there's that wonderful question, what if they gave a war and nobody came?
Yeah,
I mean, I think that would really queer their pitch.
Well,
and individuals can do a lot. I have an interesting dream. I'm not going to recommend this because it would be illegal and you wouldn't want me to do that. But here, just imagine on April the 15th, which is just 3 months from today, supposing the 50 million people or so in this country who have said, I don't want a war, would just write on their tax forms when they send them into the IRS, I am hereby deducting 25% of my federal taxes because that's what you're taking from me to fight this war. And that would kind of queer that pitch a bit, wouldn't it?
They can't put them all in jail.
They can't put them all in jail.
Yeah. That brings to mind a little note that I'd made here relative to what you were saying earlier in the program. In a purely volunteer armed force, right, refusal to join or refusal to go to the front in a given situation created by the government, wouldn't that reflect the wishes of the general population? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it would. And, yeah.
Well, speaking about that, Pete, I might just add one thing. For people who have decided, you may have joined the Army with good intentions, you're going to fight and save your country. But along the way, you started reading, you've matured a little bit, and finally decide you don't like wars anymore. You object to wars. This is a valid defense to the military to say, I've developed a conscientious objection to war. I've meant to be a conscientious objector. They can't come back and you say, I'm telling you, you have to live this way your whole life. That doesn't cut. You could develop into a conscientious objector since you've been in the Army, and they have to honor that claim. They have to prove you do not validly believe in that form of action.
Tell me, did either or both of you shake your heads in disgust back in 1970 when you saw people dodging the draft, and then after years went by, change your mind?
Yeah, I did.
That's interesting to hear, because I did the same thing. And I was drafted and very, very frightened in 1965 because it was the height of the Vietnam buildup. We were, in fact, billeted double. We were doubled up. We had 88 men to a barracks. And it was unbelievable. Very, very rough, very tough time. Let's get to this question. How can war be abolished, gentlemen? This is a very important capper to this whole thing. How can war be abolished?
Probably the simplest answer to this is to make people know the advantages of peace, to know the disadvantages of war, to live the disadvantage, to be aware of all the advantages they'll get in peace, and have them fight for peace. I should say fight, a struggle, work for peace, wage peace, we say, and as the bumper sticker will say. Peace, once again, is advantageous to the world. War is destructive to the world. And once people realize this, I hear more and more, war is not good. People keep climbing aboard. Veterans for Peace want to abolish war by the year 2000 as a offensive system, perhaps defensive a little bit. It can be abolished. We have abolished slavery. We have abolished cannibalism. We have abolished other evils in our life, and we can abolish war if we really want to. Not tomorrow, not 2 years from now, may take a little longer. Let's start on it right now. We already have, by tonight, talking about the disadvantages of war. Let's all work to abolish war. It can be done.
What do you have to say about that?
Comment is this, Peter, that in my observation, if there is time, maybe we shall have a call to contradict me, I don't know, but in my recollection, there has been no war in history that has not been started and waged by at least one government. We should therefore start by recognizing that the source of war is government and the power of government to wage war. Now, once that awful truth has sunk in, then there is some hope that individual people can do something about it. We are very favored in this country. We have a constitution. If you read some of the opening words of the Declaration of Independence, as I was doing this afternoon, one of them is that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, and these ends are to secure the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when they become destructive of those ends, quote, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That is the right of the people in this country. In other countries, not so, perhaps, but we have that right. When we rise up and start to do it, then they will stop fighting war, because they won't have the ability to fight wars. That's the target, and we've got to focus on that target. People at the moment still, even incredibly tonight, there will be those who think that government is their friend. This boggles my mind.
It seems so, yeah. And this ties in very much with something that was brought up in a previous episode of the Freedom Alternative, the right to bear arms. It ties in very well with that, because if that right is taken away, it's a violation of one of the rights provided by our Constitution.
It is, yeah.
And it would, in fact, mean that the only ones who have weapons, is the government.
Yep.
Therefore, we are in
government
danger.
And criminals,
at that point,
actually.
we're in danger. We have a call.
The bumper sticker finds a difference between government and criminals. I don't.
We have a call, gentlemen. Go ahead. You're on the air, please.
Hi, I'm a college student, and I'm in the prime age if there was a draft. And I was just curious if you all thought there would actually be a likelihood of that happening in the future.
Good question.
I think it depends on the casualties. In fact, I can almost guarantee, no, I can't guarantee anything. I feel certain in my mind there will be a draft.
You feel certain?
There will be a draft, yes.
Is that so?
Yeah, and the logistics of a draft, as soon as Congress gives the word to draft, we'd have a draft. We have the first calls, the letters out in a couple of days, a matter of a couple of days. And they start with the 20-year-old children, exhaust that age, and they go up to 21 to 26, and they finish that, they go back to 19-year-olds, 18s. The deferments will last 1 semester. You'll be able to finish your semester, then you will be eligible for the draft. Unless you're a senior. Senior, they'll let you finish the whole year. There are no plans right now to draft women, all subject to change. Congress has to give the okay for the draft to start again. You filed giving your name to your draft board. I know my son did when he took a student loan. This is part of his loan. He could not get his loan unless he registered for the draft. He did not want to, but he had to. Once again, it's the government, the big brother running things, and I can't see the tie-in, perhaps, but that's the way it is.
Caller, how do you feel at this point about what Walter's saying?
It's a very scary situation to me and my peers my age. It's definitely something that we're thinking about very heavily.
Yeah,
and we hope that it won't escalate.
It was It was over 25 years ago for me, and believe me, my stomach was filled with butterflies.
It is very scary.
I can empathize. Thank you very much for the call.
Thank you.
And tell me something. Does the capacity to annihilate in the hands of a civilized nation, does that actually deter war? Now, I know that this is juxtaposed to what you talked about before, but in the situation in the world is as it is. Does the capacity to annihilate, does it actually have a deterrent effect?
So has the bomb kept the peace, you mean? Yeah. It's a good question. Where'd you get that one from?
What do you call peace, Peter?
Peace?
Is peace when half the country's afraid? Is peace...
a very peaceful coexistence between the nations and the peoples of the world.
Does peace mean no war? Or does it mean a mind that is happy, content, a mind is not afraid? I cannot have peace when I know some guy can blow my head off. I cannot have peace when I know a country, even though we're not at war, he has his thousands of bombs. I have my thousands of bombs. I cannot sleep. I have no peace when I know I may die tomorrow, horribly.
There's a lot more that we could discuss here tonight, and I'm sure we could go on for another hour. It's been most interesting. I know that the events that transpired earlier this evening are deplorable in the eyes of many Americans. And in fact, this, as Walter says, may be something that we're going to suffer for some time to come. And since it involves religious beliefs and the oil and water no-mix situation of East-West, it appears that it's really going to be the beginning of more hatred, more violence, and I can only hope that communications and constant reminders, the kind of things that both Jim Davies and Walter Hrozenchik work toward and for every day, can get the people to understand the ramifications of all of this. For the Freedom Alternative, for Mr. Davies, for Mr. Hrozenchik, I'm Peter Verderosa. Have a pleasant week.